I didn't follow my husband because I was jealous. I followed him because something in his eyes had changed, like he was living a life I wasn't invited into. He told me, I'm going to my parents' place. Same as always. So I packed him food, kissed him goodbye, and waved like a good wife. But that day, I drove 2 hours in the opposite direction. And what I saw on that porch didn't just break my heart. It rewrote my entire marriage in one terrifying second. Because the little boy who ran into his arms didn't call him, sir. He called him Dad. Nora Bell had always believed that love lived in the small things. Not the grand gestures people posted online, not the expensive vacations, not the showy anniversary speeches. For Nora, love was the sound of a kettle whistling at 6:20 a.m. because her husband had woken up first, again, just to make sure she started her day warm. Love was the way he tightened the loose screw on their kitchen cabinet without being asked. Love was the quiet, invisible effort that made a home feel steady. At 31, Nora had built a life that looked simple from the outside and peaceful from the inside. She worked as a high school guidance counselor in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. Every day she listened to teenagers carry the weight of their worlds, broken friendships, family pressure, dreams that felt too big to touch. She didn't fix their lives, but she helped them breathe through it. She had a gift for calm. A gift for making chaos feel survivable. And then she'd come home to Mason. Mason Bell was 35, a civil surveyor who spent his weekdays measuring land and his evenings pretending he wasn't exhausted. He wasn't a talker. He wasn't poetic. He didn't know how to comfort with words the way Nora did. But he was consistent, reliable, present. They'd been married for 6 years. Not a storybook romance. Something better. Something real. A partnership built on routines that stitched their lives together. Every Sunday without fail, Mason drove to his parents' house 2 hours away in a rural area outside Eugene. Nora had never questioned it. Mason's father had health issues. His mother hated asking for help. Mason always said, "They won't tell me what they need unless I show up." So he showed up. Nora supported it the only way she knew how. She'd pack a cooler of food like a ritual. Homemade chicken pot pie wrapped in foil. Fresh rolls. A container of soup. Sometimes a slice of whatever dessert she'd baked that week. Cinnamon bread, berry crumble, lemon bars dusted with sugar. It made her feel useful. Like her care traveled with him. Like her love reached beyond their house and touched the people who raised the man she married. Sometimes, when Mason returned late Sunday evening, he'd look tired but calmer. He'd kiss her forehead, whisper "thank you," and fall asleep before he even finished taking his shoes off. And for years, Nora believed that was life. Until the silence arrived. It wasn't sudden. It didn't crash into their home. It seeped in, quietly, politely, like fog sliding under a door. Mason still did the basics. Still kissed her goodbye. Still asked, "How was work?" Still made coffee on mornings when she forgot her alarm. But his eyes stopped living in the moment. He began staring out the window during breakfast as if he could see something past the trees, past the street, past their life. He started keeping his phone face down. He began taking calls outside. And on Sundays, right before leaving, his shoulders would tense like he was bracing for impact. Nora tried to be reasonable. People get stressed. People shut down. Mason was leading a big project, he told her. Deadlines. Pressure. Long hours. So she did what she always did when someone she loved seemed heavy. She loved harder. She started waking earlier so she could make him breakfast before he left on Sundays. She bought his favorite hazelnut creamer. She ironed his shirts even though he never asked her to. She left small notes in his lunch bag. "You're doing great. I'm proud of you. I'm here." And every time she did, she hoped it would pull him back toward her. Like her kindness could be a rope. But Mason didn't move closer. He moved, sideways. He smiled more at his phone than at her. He laughed once quietly at something on a call, then noticed Nora watching and immediately swallowed the sound like it had slipped out by accident. One Friday night, Nora stood in their kitchen washing dishes while Mason dried a plate with slow, distracted motions. The window above the sink reflected them both, and Nora realized something that made her stomach tighten. They looked like strangers who shared a house. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, careful not to sound accusing. "You've been somewhere else lately." Mason's response was too quick, too smooth. "Yeah," he said, like he'd rehearsed it. "Just tired. It's work." Nora waited for more. For details. For honesty. For a crack in the wall. But he didn't give her anything. He just leaned in and kissed her cheek, soft, familiar, and walked out of the room. That's when doubt became real. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just persistent. It tapped at the corners of Nora's mind while she drove to work, while she sat through meetings, while she smiled at students who didn't know her heart was quietly spinning. She told herself she was overthinking. She told herself marriage had seasons. She told herself Mason loved her. And still, every Sunday, he left with the same sentence. "Going to my parents' place." Then he'd return hours later smelling like outside air and something Nora couldn't identify. Something not quite like the countryside, not quite like family, not quite like truth. The first time Nora thought, what if he's lying? She felt guilty for even imagining it. Mason wasn't that kind of man. He didn't flirt. He didn't party. He didn't disappear. But betrayal doesn't always show up wearing the obvious costume. Sometimes it shows up wearing routine. One Sunday morning in late October, Nora woke before dawn with an unfamiliar feeling pulsing in her chest. Resolve. Mason was still asleep beside her, breathing slow, face relaxed like he wasn't carrying secrets. The early dark made the room look softer than it was. Nora stared at him and realized she couldn't keep guessing. Guessing was turning her into someone she didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed, an email from the school district, and when she glanced at the clock, she saw it was 5:52 a.m. Mason always left at 8. Nora sat up quietly, heart beating faster than it should. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't snooping through his phone. She wasn't accusing him. She was just looking. Just confirming what she already knew. Because something inside her had already begun mourning. Mason had mentioned the night before that he might stay home this Sunday to catch up on paperwork. He'd said it casually, but Nora had noticed how his eyes avoided hers when he said it. And now, in the silence of the early morning, Nora made a decision so calm it scared her. If Mason wasn't going to his parents, then where was he going? By 7:30, Nora moved through the kitchen like muscle memory. She packed food, because she couldn't stop being herself even while her world cracked. A container of soup. 2 sandwiches. A small box of brownies. A bottle of water. Then she stopped. She stared at the cooler and realized how absurd it was. She was packing love for a lie. Nora set the cooler down, grabbed her keys, and slipped into a hoodie and jeans. She didn't wake Mason. She didn't leave a note. She just walked out into the cold morning air and got into her car. The sky was still pale, the streets quiet, the world unaware that Nora's life was about to split in two. She drove toward the highway, hands steady on the wheel, breath controlled. At first, she told herself she was only going to his parents' house. She would show up, surprise them, prove her doubt wrong, laugh at herself, and come home relieved. That was the story she rehearsed, because it was the kinder one. But halfway through the drive, Nora realized something. She wasn't heading toward his parents' house at all. Because she didn't take the exit Mason always took. She took the one after that. And as the road stretched ahead, Nora's heart began to pound with a terrible certainty. Somewhere, in a place she had never been invited, Mason was living a life that didn't include her. And she was about to see it with her own eyes. Nora's hands stayed steady on the steering wheel, but her body didn't believe the calm she was forcing. The farther she drove, the more the world outside her windshield started to feel unreal. like she'd slipped into someone else's story by mistake. The trees thickened. The houses thinned. Cell service flickered once, then returned. The sun climbed slowly, pale and cold, casting long shadows across the road. Every mile made the same question heavier. If he's not going to his parents, where is he going? She tried to talk herself out of it. Maybe he took a different route today. Maybe there was a detour. Maybe he really was working and she was about to embarrass herself with suspicion she didn't want to admit she had. But her gut didn't feel like paranoia. It felt like a warning. Nora reached the rural area Mason always described as quiet. Country quiet. The kind that sounded peaceful until you were alone inside it with a heart full of dread. She passed a worn wooden sign for a small community center, then a gas station with 2 pumps and a faded soda banner. She kept driving. Then just ahead she saw the turn, a narrow road that curved off the main highway, bordered by tall grass and a line of trees. It looked like the kind of place people chose when they didn't want to be found. Nora slowed. Her fingers tightened on the wheel. She took the turn. The road dipped and twisted, and her tires crunched over loose gravel. A few minutes later, the trees opened into a small cluster of houses, older, modest, spaced apart like they were keeping secrets from each other. And then she saw it. A familiar dark SUV parked near the end of a driveway, angled slightly toward the road like the driver might need to leave quickly. Nora's stomach dropped so fast she felt dizzy. Mason's car. For a moment, she just stared. Like if she didn't blink, the vehicle might turn into something else. Like the sight of it could still be explained away by some miracle of misunderstanding. But it didn't change. Her mouth went dry. Her skin went cold. Her heartbeat was suddenly loud enough to fill the car. Nora eased her own car onto the shoulder, a few houses away, far enough that she could watch without being immediately noticed. She cut the engine and sat there, frozen, her hands still gripping the wheel as if it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The house was small, with a low porch and a garden that looked carefully maintained. A wind chime hung near the front door, swaying gently. The scene was almost peaceful. Until the front door opened. Nora's breath caught. Mason stepped out onto the porch. For half a second, relief tried to rise, because seeing him was familiar, because he was real, because he existed in her world and not just in her fear. Then the rest of the moment arrived. A woman followed him outside. Nora had never seen her before. She looked to be around Mason's age, maybe early 30s. Dark hair pulled back loosely. A simple sweater. No heavy makeup. Nothing dramatic. Just ordinary. The kind of ordinary that made it worse, because it didn't look like a fling. It looked like routine. The woman stood close, too close, and Mason didn't step away. Instead, he smiled. Not the polite smile he gave the neighbors. Not the tired smile he gave Nora lately. A real smile. The kind Nora hadn't seen in months. The woman said something Nora couldn't hear, and Mason's face softened. He lifted his hand, and with a gentleness that made Nora's throat tighten, he brushed a strand of hair away from the woman's cheek, like he'd done it before, like his fingers knew the motion. The woman laughed quietly. And then Nora saw the child. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6, burst out of the doorway like a spark. He ran straight across the porch, feet stomping, arms wide, energy unstoppable. "Daddy!" the boy shouted. The word hit Nora like a physical blow. Daddy. Not Mason. Not sir. Not hey. Daddy. The boy wrapped his arms around Mason's legs with complete certainty, like this was where he belonged. Mason bent down and lifted him easily, like muscle memory. Like he'd done it 100 times. The child's small hands clung to Mason's shoulders, and Mason pressed his face briefly against the boy's hair, eyes closing for a moment as if he was inhaling something he needed. Then he ruffled the boy's hair and said something soft, something intimate. Nora couldn't hear the words. But she didn't need them. The woman stepped closer and placed her hand lightly on Mason's shoulder, comfortable and familiar. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look guilty. She looked settled. Like a person who didn't believe she was stealing anything. Nora's vision blurred. She blinked hard, but tears still filled her eyes, turning the scene into a trembling watercolor. Her brain tried to protect her by scrambling for reasons. Maybe he's a godfather. Maybe he's helping a friend. Maybe this is his cousin's kid. But none of those explanations survived the way Mason held the boy, like it was his favorite weight in the world. None survived the way the boy said, "Daddy," without hesitation. None survived the way Mason's whole face looked alive. Nora's chest tightened so hard she struggled to breathe. Her hands had gone numb on the wheel. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out the wind, the birds, the entire world. Her marriage hadn't been cracked by a mistake. It had been built beside a secret. And she had been living inside the part that was convenient. A sound escaped her, small, involuntary, like a broken inhale. She clapped a hand over her mouth instinctively, terrified she'd make noise, terrified someone would turn and see her. But no one looked her way. Mason shifted the boy onto his hip and carried him inside. The woman followed, pausing for a second to adjust something on the porch table. Like a life was happening here that didn't stop for anyone else. The door closed. And Nora finally moved. Her hands shook so badly she had to force her fingers to reach for the keys even though they were already in the ignition. Her whole body felt like it had been unplugged from reality. Like she was floating above herself, watching a woman in a car slowly come apart. She started the engine. The sound was too loud. She flinched, terrified it would draw attention, but the house remained still. Nora pulled away from the shoulder, careful not to spin gravel. Her breaths came out sharp and uneven. She drove. At first, she didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away before she did something, before she screamed, before she ran up to that porch, before she begged for an explanation she didn't deserve to beg for. The road blurred again. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, but tears kept coming. Her throat hurt from holding back sound. Her stomach churned like she might be sick. She drove until her hands cramped from gripping the wheel. Finally, when the shaking became too much, she pulled into an empty parking lot beside a closed roadside diner. The sign said open 6 a.m., but the windows were dark, chairs stacked on tables like the place was asleep. Nora turned off the car and sat there, trembling. For a long time, she just stared at the steering wheel. Then she pressed her forehead against it and let the sobs come, deep, heavy cries that felt like they'd been waiting in her body for weeks. Her mind replayed the porch scene in brutal loops. Mason's smile. The woman's hand on his shoulder. The boy's voice. "Daddy." A thought surfaced through the pain, sharp and clear. He didn't just lie to her. He built a whole second world and left her out of it, then let her spend years being loyal to a story that wasn't true. Nora lifted her head slowly, wiping her face again. Her eyes were swollen, but something inside her had hardened. Not into hatred. Into clarity. She reached for her phone, hands still shaking, and opened her messages. She stared at Mason's name. A normal wife would text, "Where are you?" A normal wife would demand answers. But Nora wasn't going to give him that. Not yet. Because if Mason had been able to perform love for years, coffee, kisses, routines, then Nora could perform calm for a little longer. She could act like she didn't know. She could watch. And she could collect the truth the way a careful person collects proof. Quietly, patiently, without tipping the liar off. Nora took a slow breath. Then she typed, "Hey. Hope your day's going okay. Do you want me to make dinner tonight?" She stared at the message for a moment. Her finger hovered. Then she sent it. The phone showed it delivered. Nora leaned back in her seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. Her chest still hurt, but her mind had shifted into a different mode, one she recognized from her job, from counseling students through crisis. Step 1. Don't panic. Step 2. Don't react until you know what you're reacting to. Step 3. Protect yourself. Outside, the wind moved the trees. The empty diner sat in silence. And somewhere back on that porch, Mason was living like two lives could coexist without consequences. He had no idea that Nora had seen everything. And he had no idea that her revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be smart. It would be clean. And it would leave him with exactly what he'd earned. The truth, finally, in the open. With nowhere left to hide. Nora drove home like she was carrying a bomb inside her chest, something that could explode if she breathed wrong. By the time she reached her town, the sun had climbed higher, and the streets were full of normal life. People walking dogs, couples holding coffee, kids riding bikes. The world looked untouched. Nora wanted to scream at it. How could everything look so normal when her marriage had just died on a porch? She parked a block away from her house and sat in her car for a long time. Her hands were still trembling, but her tears had stopped. Not because she felt better, because something deeper had taken over. A cold kind of focus. She thought of Mason's face when he laughed on that porch, and a bitter truth settled in her bones. He hadn't been visiting his parents. He'd been visiting his real life. When she finally walked inside, the house felt strangely quiet. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the cinnamon bread she'd baked the night before. A jacket hung on the chair where Mason always left it. Everything looked like their marriage was still intact. But Nora knew better. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mason. "Yeah, dinner sounds great. I'll be home by 7. Love you." Nora stared at the screen, the word "love you" glowing like a joke. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed back. "Okay. Drive safe." No heart emoji. No extra sweetness. Just neutral. Then she put her phone down and started breathing like she'd learned to teach panicking teenagers. Slow inhale, slow exhale, repeat until your brain stops screaming. She needed proof. Not because she wanted drama. Because she refused to be gaslit. Mason had built a second world, and the worst part wasn't just that it existed. It was that he thought he could keep it hidden forever. Like she was too soft, too trusting, too blind. Nora wasn't blind anymore. That evening, when Mason came home, he acted like everything was normal. He kissed her cheek, dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, and asked about her day. He even complimented the smell of dinner. Nora smiled when she needed to. She nodded at the right moments. She listened like she wasn't listening for cracks in his voice. But she was. The way he avoided eye contact when she mentioned Sunday plans. The way he kept his phone close, angled away. The way his laugh sounded forced, like he was auditioning for the role of good husband. Nora sat across from him at the dinner table and watched him chew, swallow, smile, perform. The same man who held a little boy in his arms like the child was his heart. She wondered how many versions of himself Mason had created. And which one was real. After dinner, Mason stood to rinse his plate. "I'm going to take a shower," he said casually. "Long day." Nora nodded. "Go ahead." As soon as he disappeared down the hall, Nora moved. Not rushed. Not frantic. Quiet. She walked into their bedroom and opened the drawer where Mason kept paperwork, receipts, insurance cards, random documents. She'd never gone through his things before. It used to feel like betrayal. Now it felt like survival. She sifted through stacks of papers until she found a small envelope, folded and shoved near the back. Inside were gas station receipts. Nora's eyes scanned the printed addresses, and her stomach tightened. The receipts weren't from a station near his parents' house. They were from the small rural town she'd driven through earlier that morning. She held the paper in her palm like it might burn her. The date stamps confirmed it, every Sunday. Every lie. She took photos of the receipts and placed everything back exactly as it had been. Then she walked to the living room and sat down, heart steady now in a terrifying way. Mason came out of the shower later, towel around his shoulders, hair damp. He kissed Nora's head like she was his safe place. "You okay?" he asked. Nora looked up and smiled. "I'm fine." It was the easiest lie she'd ever told. Because Mason had taught her how. That night, after he fell asleep, Nora stayed awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about calling someone, her sister, her best friend, but she stopped herself. Not yet. She didn't want pity. She wanted power. The next morning at work, she did what she always did. Helped students, smiled at coworkers, drank tea from her favorite mug. But underneath her calm was a plan quietly forming. During lunch break, she opened her laptop and began searching. It started simple. Property records, local directories, public data. She typed in the name of the rural town. She zoomed into maps, traced the road where she'd parked. She looked for landmarks, the diner, the gas station, the community center sign. Then she searched social media. She didn't even know what she was looking for until she saw it. A public profile. A woman with dark hair, wearing a sweater like the one Nora had seen. The cover photo was of a little boy holding a toy truck. And the caption read, "Sunday with Daddy." Nora's body went cold. She clicked through photos slowly, like flipping through evidence in a case file. There was the same porch. The same garden. The same little boy. And then, like a knife sliding between her ribs, there was Mason. Not hidden in the background. Not accidentally captured. Smiling directly at the camera. His arm around the woman. The child sitting in his lap. A perfect little family portrait. Nora stared at the screen until her eyes hurt. So it wasn't just a secret son. It was a secret family. A whole separate life. Documented, photographed, celebrated. And Nora wasn't in any of it. Her fingers didn't shake this time. She took screenshots of everything. Dates, captions, comments, proof stacked neatly like bricks. When she closed her laptop, she felt something she hadn't felt since this started. Control. She wasn't going to confront Mason like a crying wife in a movie. She wasn't going to beg. Nora was going to be smarter than the lie. Because revenge didn't have to be loud to be brutal. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is letting someone watch you become untouchable, while you quietly prepare to take everything back. And Mason had no idea what was coming. Nora didn't confront Mason the next day. She didn't cry. She didn't throw things. She didn't ask why. Because she realized something important. Men who live double lives don't confess, unless they have no other choice. So Nora became patient. For the first time in years, she stopped pouring all her love into saving something that was already rotten. Instead, she poured her energy into preparing. That week, she acted normal. She laughed at Mason's jokes. She asked about his work. She even reminded him to take a jacket on Sunday because the weather forecast said it might rain. Mason looked relieved, like the world was still under his control. But Nora wasn't asleep anymore. On Wednesday, Nora called in sick from work and met with a lawyer in the next town over. She walked into the office with a folder, screenshots, receipts, dates, locations. Not emotions. Evidence. The lawyer didn't look surprised. He only nodded slowly and said, "You did the right thing by documenting everything." That sentence gave Nora a strange kind of peace. Because now she knew her pain could become power. On Friday night, Nora did something Mason would never expect. She planned a special date night. She cooked his favorite meal. She set the table with candles. She wore the dress Mason always said made her look beautiful. Mason smiled like he'd won something. Like the marriage was safe. Halfway through dinner, Nora picked up her glass, looked at him warmly, and said, "I want to do something different this Sunday." Mason froze for just a second. Different how? Nora tilted her head innocently. "I want to come with you to your parents' house. It's been years. I think it's time I visited properly." Mason's fork stopped mid-air. His face tried to hold the same calm expression, but his eyes betrayed him. A flash of panic. A crack in the mask. "Oh. Sunday might not be a good idea," he said quickly. "My mom's been stressed." The house is a mess. It's not. Nora smiled. Soft. Sweet. Then we'll clean with them, she said. I don't mind. They're family. Mason swallowed hard. And in that moment, Nora knew she had him. Because if his parents were the truth, he wouldn't be afraid. But he was terrified. Nora reached across the table and squeezed his hand like a loving wife. And Mason squeezed back. Still lying. Still smiling. Still completely unaware that Nora wasn't asking to join him on Sunday. She was setting the perfect trap. Sunday arrived quietly. The sky was gray, the air sharp with cold, and everything looked normal, like the world had no idea what was about to collapse. Mason moved through the morning like a man walking on thin ice. He shaved twice. He checked his phone constantly. He avoided Nora's eyes more than usual. And Nora was calm. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because her pain had transformed into something stronger than tears. Control. At 7:45 a.m., Mason reached for his keys. I'll head out soon, he said, forcing a casual tone. You know, my parents need help with the shed again. Nora nodded and smiled sweetly. Of course. I'm ready. Mason froze. Ready. Nora picked up her purse like she'd been doing this forever. To go with you, she said gently. I told you on Friday. I want to visit them properly. Mason's face shifted, too fast for him to hide it. Panic flashed in his eyes like a warning light. Nora, it's really not a good time, he said, voice tight. My mom's not feeling well, and the house. Nora stepped closer and fixed the collar of his jacket like a devoted wife. Then she'll appreciate seeing me even more, Nora replied softly. It's okay, Mason. Let's go. For a second Mason looked like he might snap. Like he might finally confess. But instead, he did what liars always do. He tried to control the moment. Fine, he said sharply, then softened his voice. Just don't judge them, okay? Nora kissed his cheek. I would never. They got in the car. The drive felt longer than before, even though the distance hadn't changed. Mason's hands gripped the wheel as if he was trying to steer away from disaster. He barely spoke. Nora stared out the window, her expression calm. Inside, her heart beat with a steady promise. Today, the lie ends. After nearly 2 hours, Nora noticed it. Mason didn't take the exit toward his parents' farmhouse. He took the next one. He followed the same hidden road Nora had discovered. And Mason didn't even realize he was confirming everything. Nora let him drive. Let him dig his own grave. Finally, the houses appeared. The gravel road. The quiet little neighborhood where truth lived in plain sight. Mason slowed when he turned into the driveway. The dark SUV rolled forward, tires crunching softly. The porch was there. The garden. The wind chime swaying like it was welcoming him home. Mason parked. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment too long, staring ahead like he was praying for time to reverse. Then he looked at Nora. His voice came out strained. Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. Nora blinked, pretending innocence. Harder than what? Mason's mouth opened, then closed. Because he couldn't explain a lie without exposing it. Nora opened her car door first. The cold air hit her face like reality. And as she stepped out, the front door of the house opened. Almost perfectly timed, like this scene had happened every Sunday for years. The woman appeared. And behind her, the little boy. The boy smiled brightly and ran forward, just like before. Daddy, he shouted. Mason flinched. Nora didn't. She walked forward with slow, steady steps. No shaking, no hesitation. The woman's smile faded the moment she saw Nora. Her eyes flicked from Nora to Mason, confusion rising fast. Mason, the woman said carefully. Who is this? Mason swallowed hard. His face drained of color. But Nora didn't wait for him to speak. Because she didn't come here for excuses. She came for truth. Nora looked at the woman, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Hi," she said. "My name is Nora Bell. I'm Mason's wife." Silence fell like a heavy blanket. The little boy stopped running and looked between them, sensing something wrong. His small face tightened in confusion. The woman stepped back as if Nora's words had pushed her. "Wife," she repeated, barely breathing. Mason's mouth trembled. "Nora, please." Nora turned to him slowly. For 6 years, she had loved this man, trusted him, built a home around him. And now, standing in front of his secret world, she saw him clearly for the first time. Not a hero. Not a victim. A coward. "You didn't just lie to me," Nora said quietly. "You built 2 lives and thought you could balance them like a schedule." Mason stepped closer, hands raised as if he could calm a storm. "I was going to tell you." Nora's eyes didn't soften. "When?" "After 10 years. After 20. After I wasted my whole life being loyal to a man who split his loyalty in half." The woman's lips parted. Her voice shook. "Mason, you told me you were divorced." Mason's head snapped toward her. "I said it was complicated." "Complicated," Nora repeated, voice rising for the first time. "Complicated is taxes. Complicated is life. This is not complicated. This is deception." The boy stared up at Mason, confused and scared. "Daddy," he whispered. That single word hit Nora's heart for half a second. Not with jealousy. With grief. Because the child didn't deserve this. None of it was his fault. Nora crouched down slightly, her voice gentle for the first time that morning. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "You didn't do anything wrong, okay?" The child blinked, uncertain. Nora stood again and faced Mason. "I'm not here to scream," she said. "I'm here to end this." Mason's eyes filled with panic. "Nora, please. We can fix it. I love you." Nora let out a slow breath, almost like a laugh, but colder. "You don't love me," she replied. "You loved the comfort I gave you. You loved the image. You loved having someone at home while you played father somewhere else." Mason tried to grab her hand. Nora stepped back. "I met with a lawyer," she continued calmly. "I have every receipt, every photo, every date. I know the truth, Mason. And now I'm making the choice you stole from me." Mason's voice cracked. "What choice?" Nora pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out. "Divorce papers." "I'm done," she said. "You can be a husband to your lies. But you won't be my husband anymore." The woman covered her mouth, tears forming. "I didn't know," she whispered. Nora looked at her, eyes steady. "I believe you," she said honestly. "But now you do know." Mason's knees seemed to weaken. "Nora." Nora raised a hand, stopping him without touching him. "No," she said quietly. "Not another word. You've taken enough years from me." Then Nora turned around and walked back toward the car. Each step felt like power. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because she was finally free. As she sat in the driver's seat, she glanced one last time in the rearview mirror. Mason stood frozen on the porch, exposed, trapped inside the truth he had built. And Nora drove away with dignity intact. Her revenge wasn't destruction. Her revenge was clarity. She didn't fight for a man who never fully chose her. She chose herself. The end. Ending line, for YouTube voiceover. If you enjoyed this story, kindly like this video, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more powerful stories. Also comment below, what would you do if you were Nora? Broken Heart Fire.